Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Kim Dozier.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We are here to talk about Afghanistan and the fate of the 35 million people who were essentially, as they see it, abandoned by the US and many Western nations when they pulled out in August of 2021. And these some 18 million women in particular who have seen their rights systematically stripped by the Taliban in the months since. I would like to invite our speaker onto the stage. This is Fawzia Koofi, founder and president of Women for Afghanistan. She's former vice president of the Afghan parliament and a former negotiator who worked to negotiate peace for Afghanistan with the Taliban. Fawzia. Fawzia, you and I both were working on the Afghan negotiations, though I wasn't talking to you at the time. And back in Washington, D.C., I remember going to the Afghan embassy and the Afghan ambassador, a woman, and I kept talking about, could this be real? Will there be peace? And I also remember seeing Congressman Mike Waltz there, who was regularly on the phone with President Donald Trump in his first term, talking Trump out of doing the same kind of pullout that we saw Biden do. I want to dig into your history, but before we do that, can you just take us through what it's like for any woman in Afghanistan today? How have their rights changed since August 2021?
Thank you, Kim. I think August 2021 collapse of Afghanistan to the Taliban and the return of Taliban to power is not just, the change of another regime, silencing the people, with that millions of dreams and hope shattered. But I think it's also, it marks the fact that the collapse of the international order, or the change of the global order when it comes to the global North leadership. I think a lot of fates that were connected to how the global North will fulfill the commitments were challenged by the way that the withdrawal happened in Afghanistan and the way the negotiations were handled with the Taliban and eventually led to the Taliban return to power.
I want to give the audience a chance to participate. I see some of you have already gotten out your Slido, but I'd like to invite everybody now to vote, because I don't know how many votes that represents. My question to the audience is, was leaving Afghanistan on August 30th, 2021 the right thing to do? Because I know how I feel about it. We've just heard a bit how you feel about it, but I want to see what the audience thinks. So 86% say no, 25% say yes. And that's shrinking a bit. We're going back and forth. So what is it like for women in Afghanistan today?
Just to go to this poll, I don't think any country wants a foreign troop to be in their country forever.
Yeah.
So the people of Afghanistan never expected the foreign troops, NATO, international allies to be in Afghanistan forever. But I think the way the withdrawal happened, in the form that it happened, because millions of people were affected by war. We were in the full front of protecting democracy, freedom for the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. You came to Afghanistan because your own soils were attacked by the 11th September, events. You did not come just because you wanted to save people of Afghanistan or provide liberty to the women. You came because your own security was at risk, not only in the US, in Europe, and in the rest of the world. So we believed for a while that this is now going to bring a real change in Afghanistan. I remember I was then, promoting the Back to School campaign, working on girls' education, etc. How happy the people in Kabul streets were, and I'm sure you have visited Afghanistan then. The fact that they could breathe normally. They didn't know who is now invading Afghanistan, NATO, US, Europe. That was not the main concern. The main thing that made people feel hopeful and happy was that they are now breathing normally. Because that freedom.
Because after the Taliban left, they were allowed to listen to music, read whatever they wanted, do art of things that represented people, etc., things that were banned under the strict Taliban rule, which has a very, very strict, and some would say, interpretation of Islam from when Islam was first founded thousands of years ago.
In many occasions, actually, what the Taliban do contradicts Islamic principles, especially when it comes to women's rights to education and work, because the foundation of Islam is about education and enlightenment. They are using the self-defined interpretation of Islam as a means of power, to stay in power. So now, going back to your question, now I think after 15th of August, you can imagine how dramatically life changed for millions.
But I can imagine it, but I've been to Afghanistan. I mean, I remember after the fall of the Taliban in 2001, 2002, what people were telling me on the streets is that for the first time they can, women can go to school, women can wear what they want, even going without veils. Women could get jobs. Everyone could start businesses. And then the U.S. mission changed again and again and again, depending on which general was in power, depending on which president was in power. It morphed from a security mission to the roots of this problem are that this country needs better education, it needs better infrastructure, it needs a better military, and we need to build all of that. And that is what we saw going on for 20 years. And then you'd have someone come in like a President Obama saying, okay, we want to shrink because it just needs to be security. And back and forth we went. And the last proposal I knew that General Scotty Miller had made was to keep about 2,000 forces in Afghanistan, and the contractors that were the backbone of the Afghan army. And between the 2,000 forces, which would essentially also protect the existing Afghan government just by being there, that the democratic system could continue. But instead, both Trump and Biden were leaning towards a plan that we saw in the end that just pulled everybody out. And we went from a place where you could be the vice president of parliament to a place where, as I understand the latest restrictions, women's voices are not allowed to be heard outside of their own home?
Absolutely. So when today or recently when I hear about some of the terms that resemble so much to what happened in Afghanistan about the peace process in Ukraine, it reminds me of how similar these processes are handled. I think in the case of Afghanistan, in most cases, the United States decided unilaterally without including its partners, including the EU, Europe, and other partners in the region.
I did hear that complaint from European diplomats.
And I think that was the time that the Europe should have started thinking about, how they could invest independently more on a foreign policy centered around security. Now they have come to this understanding. I think that was the time. I remember when the collapse happened on the 15th, many of the European allies went to the airport and they were not allowed to enter the airport by the US Marines because the Europeans did not have their own footprint on the ground after the collapse. So now in Afghanistan, of course, the Taliban the interpretation of Islam and the way they do it, which again contradicts Islam, suppress women to the extent that you cannot even imagine. To the extent that you cannot even imagine.
Tell us some of the details, because I don't.
All of
you
us
and I are covering it.
I want to, for a while, put everybody. I want to request the audience to put their feet in the shoes of women of Afghanistan for a while. You're a woman. For over a matter of a few hours, you're not allowed to go to school, university, work. Recently, they have said that women even cannot speak loudly in the public because their voice is regarded as intimacy. You're not allowed to go to leave your house and go like for shopping without a male companion. For instance, if you are a former military or whatever, your husband was killed in the war, because we paid huge cost to this war. If your child is sick and you want to take it to the hospital, you're stopped at several checkposts. This is what happened to me when I was in first round of Taliban. When they took my husband to prison, I wanted to follow him, and they stopped me in several checkpoints. I had to go through so many checkpoints when the taxi driver was introducing me as his sister, so that he became my mahram, which is like blood companion, and that way Taliban would allow me to follow my husband and know where he is being taken, which was taken to Intelligence Department number 3, which is the notorious intelligence department. So now if women resist, which they do in small numbers, they protest on the streets, they write, they go to the offices, they create underground schools, they even establish overground schools, knowing that there is risk involved in this. They go to offices knowing that it's banned by the Taliban. They write, they react, they go to the streets, they protest, taking enormous risks to their lives. Indicate that Afghanistan has transformed, that Taliban need to adopt to this transformation. But on the contrary, Taliban have issued 120 plus edicts only to suppress women. Means that they are in a full-fledged war against women. They think that they will gain their power by suppressing women, because the whole Taliban existence is about suppression. It's not only the women, religious minorities, ethnic groups, former military forces. They are being, targeted, killing against them, arbitrary detention. The sad part of all of this is that the rest of the world, especially the countries in the region, have an approach, and even the global north, have an approach that things are normal. We need to keep the stability of Afghanistan.
I understand that they have, since the takeover of the Taliban most recently, they've pledged something like $7 billion in aid to the Taliban government, and more than half of that has been delivered?
Actually, yes, the Taliban have a very good division of labor. They want the international community to feed the people of Afghanistan, so they have no obligation to feed the people. They claim that they have increased the domestic revenue by collecting the taxes, etc. They spend all of the money on their security. So the whole spirit, the foundation of the deal between United States and the Taliban was that the Taliban will protect the soils of Afghanistan from being used to attack the U.S. or the NATO member states' security.
This is what you were working on as a negotiator. One of the things that the Taliban was supposed to deliver was, if we take over, they promised that they would suppress any terrorist activity.
Exactly.
So what are you hearing?
Yes, exactly. That was the whole idea, that the United States actually, tasked the Taliban to fight other military extremist groups. In this case, like for instance, ISIS, which is Daesh, Al-Qaeda, TTP, other military. There are 25 military extremist groups working between Afghanistan and Central Asia. So the United States wanted Taliban to fight these groups for them. On the contrary, we know that in July 2022, Ayman al-Zawahiri, which is the Al-Qaeda leader, was killed just 2 kilometers away from the palace in Afghanistan, right?
In Kabul, yeah.
In 2 kilometers. TTP is operating freely. TTP is like Tariq Taliban Pakistan, freely in Afghanistan. Other, military radicalized groups that are a threat to Central Asian countries operate between Afghanistan and Central Asia. So I think it's very naive for the world to believe that one military extremist group will be able to fight another military extremist group. I believe it's only the people's power. It's only democracy. When you give freedom to the people, they are able to exercise their rights. They have access to economic resources. They have access to education and opportunities that will be able to dismantle military extremism.
So now that we've thoroughly depressed the audience, is there anything that people here who are representatives of or live in the global north, what can they do to help Afghanistan now?
Well, I think the audience should know, that because we, as a global citizens, we have responsibility. The case of Afghanistan should not happen to any other country. And still, it's not late. Before Afghanistan becomes yet another, hub for attacking Europe or US or any other parts of the world, we need to act collectively as a citizens. First of all, we need to hold Taliban accountable for what they do in contradiction, not only to Islamic principles, but to any principles. International law.
Would you like to see them cut out aid, even if it would affect how the Afghan people are able to survive day to day?
Too late now, because the Taliban have gone past that survival mode. There are many other things that we could do. First of all, it's an absolute apartheid. What's happening in Afghanistan. If you exclude a gender or group of religion or faith or race or anybody based on what they look like or their physical appearance, that's apartheid. So we need to recognize gender apartheid in the case of Afghanistan.
What can the international community do to change those norms? How can they influence the Taliban to change its policies?
I think accountability. We need to hold them accountable. So apartheid is one thing. Using ICC, ICJ for crimes against humanity is the other thing. Changing the political ecosystem. I believe there should be a political process. I think the world should not look Afghanistan as only as a failed scenario, but rather as a scenario that we can still fix. I'm not inviting the NATO military presence in Afghanistan. What I'm inviting is that out of the busy schedule of the global leaders, which there are many competing agendas, we need to give some time for thinking about Afghanistan beyond humanitarian aid and think how we can fix politics there. And again, I'm not asking you to help us elect leaders. I'm asking you to give us the space as political opposition, women leading the political opposition, because we are leading that narrative. Give us the space so that we come together and draft our own narrative for what is good for our country. For now, Kim, even to have that space for us is impossible.
So how about the people who say, we gave you 20 years of that?
But there were a lot of mistakes, because what happened in 20 years? You supported elections, we choose leaders. You did not agree with the leader. In 2014, we choose, for instance, elected Dr. Abdullah as a president, right? But John Kerry at that time came and said, you need to create a national unity government. So Dr. Abdullah is not the winner, Ashraf Ghani is the winner.
Got it. So right now, people in this audience, should they be asking their governments to restrict aid or to...
Few things, very concrete. First of all, accountability. Please make sure that your governments, if they are member of UN in New York, Geneva, wherever they are, that they are active on case of Afghanistan referring to ICC, International Criminal Court, and ICJ. This is the first thing. Second, gender apartheid. If there is gender apartheid in the Rome Statute recognized, then governments will think twice before they engage. Second, engagement with the Taliban should be based on principles. The major principle should be how do they deliver on human rights and women's rights. And lastly, we need to work for a political process. We have started a dialogue where we are bringing all non-Taliban constituents together, led by women, to think about genuinely what is good for our country. This time we don't want the laws to be translated from English or French or German to our languages. This time we want to do it ourselves.
So that's a great place to end it. So support the political dialogue to create a genuine new Afghan government.
Before it becomes too late. Kim, I think Afghanistan collapse was not only a testimony for the world in terms of how they failed in war, but also in principles. You need to fix it, because I think if Afghanistan did not collapse, the global North leadership did not collapse to the extent that the Ukraine war happened. So there is an interconnectivity, because what happened in Afghanistan empowered many authoritarian leaders, regimes, that they can do it.
So fair warning to the future. And we will end with that. Thank you very much, Fawzia, and we salute your continuing fight.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.